The second kind of soil that Jesus talks about is the shallow heart. It's the shallow heart. Verse 5. Let's look at the screen here. Other seed fell on rocky ground where it did not have much soil, and immediately it sprang up, since it had no depth of soil. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and since it had no root, it withered away. Now it said it has some soil, but it did not have depth of soil. It is described as rocky ground. It does not mean that there was rocks mixed in with the soil. What this means is this: there was a very thin layer of topsoil on top of bedrock. So there is some dirt, there is some soil, but there's no depth there. And this is the explanation. And these are the ones sown on rocky ground, the one who, when they hear the word, immediately receive it with joy, and when they have no root in themselves, but endure for a while, then when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately they fall away. Now, this is the response to the word. The response is emotional. There is joy, right? And that joy is authentic. It is an authentic joy. And I believe, especially for those that are feelers, and especially for younger people, they would say, they have the feels with the Z. And nowadays, truth is defined by many people as not necessarily what is objective truth, but how I feel about it. And so the goal of many people is to be synced with how they feel about something, and that is what they define as true and anchoring. And so for many people, the Christian life is a pursuit of a constant, sustained, emotional high or consistency. And so they would come to church, and they long for a great praise set or a convicting message. And the message can be comforting as well as convicting. And a person may lift both hands up, will fervently take notes, or even get a little bit teary-eyed. But for this emotion-driven person, as opposed to an intellect-driven person, it is primarily an emotional exercise. And here's the problem. Verse 6 tells us, when the sun rose, it was scorched, and since it had no roots, it withered away. And verse 17, because they have no root themselves. It was an untethered emotion. It was not tied to some propositional truths, but it was simply something that just happened. The seed was not able to go deep, find their way through the soil to get a source of life-giving water. And in Luke chapter 8, verse 6 says, it withered away because it had no moisture. Now, here's the problem with emotion-based faith. Emotion-based or emotion-driven or emotion-exclusive faith. And I want to say that emotion is important, and I don't want us to think that emotion is bad, feeling is bad, that it's okay to have to be absolutely in love with God without feeling anything. That's ridiculous. If a young girl says, I met this young man and he asked me to marry him, and she says, I'm thinking that I'm going to say yes because I've done my analysis and the return on investment seems very sound. The risk benefit ratio is sound, and the analysis is good. And I would say, well, do you love him? He said, no, I feel absolutely no emotion toward him. I'm not attracted to him at all. But I think it's a good investment. And I would say, no, that's silly. Emotions could go up and down, but you have to have a certain degree of attraction to him, do you not? But on the other hand, if a young lady comes to me and says, I met this young man and I think I'm in love, and he asked me to marry him. I barely know his name. I know almost nothing about him. But we can finish each other's sandwiches. It's frozen, right? I would say, well, that's silly. Because that feeling of love is not tethered in fact and knowledge and conviction. It's just shallow. And what James 1 says about that kind of faith is that it is a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. It is double-minded and unstable. Relying primarily on emotions, it's unreliable, unsustainable. It's kind of like a drug that we want more and more of, and it wears off after a while. And here's the thing, being online exposes something. Okay. Now, a lot of church experts believe that in order that one of the most important things that they need to do for an individual when they come to church is provide a great experience. And a great experience is something like this. You get them packed together, turn down the lights with and shine lights up on the stage, and the music and the crescendo and hazers or fog machines, and you get them to have an amazing experience. And the problem with being online is that we can't replicate that through the stream. And so what it's exposing is that those who are driven by emotions are not being satisfied online. And here's the second problem with emotion-driven faith. It's not only unsustainable, but an emotion-driven faith is vulnerable to emotion-driven circumstance. And so what we are told here is that trials and tribulation, when they come, that we have difficulties. When opposing feelings come, that our emotion-based heart will fall away, it says. Now, let me give you an example of how this may work. Today, we just sang a song right before I came up. One of the songs we sang, the words went something like this, if I can. And I don't know if you realize, but in the history of the modern church, praise songs were written mostly by theologians and pastors, right? But it's in modern days, and the history of this is not that deep, really. In modern Western Christianity, songs no longer are written by theologians, but by creative people. And so the creative people, but like the psalmists, we're not saying that they're bad, they aim for the emotion and not necessarily the intellect. And let me give you an example, okay? Now, this is a song that we just sang. I lift my hands to heaven, hear my heart surrendered. I tell my soul again, you are the Lord of all. Though the seas are raging, you will speak and tame them. In you I find my rest. You are in control. Like I said, it's kind of like the psalm. There's a lot of metaphors and things of that nature. But they're also employing devices and words and phrases that people like me, that I'm more of a thinker than a feeler, I just would not necessarily use. And John, I can say that John is here because he prayed. So I can say, hey, John, it's good to see you. Hey, don't you think that the seas are raging right now? Isn't it good to know that God will speak and tame them? Like, we wouldn't say that. John and I would say, hey, what's the COVID number like today? Is it up, down? Is it setting a record? What about compared to mortality rates? We would talk facts and not necessarily emotions. But this is what's going on. songwriters use devices to appeal to the emotion. And this is what I found myself, and even today, as I was singing, now mouthing the words of the song, I lift my hands to heaven. I tell my soul again, you are Lord of all. This is what I found, that instead of focusing on the meaning of the words, I found myself being carried away by the emotion of the music. What was designed to reinforce the meaning of the words have become the thing that we remember the most. And so when we hear or when we experience a great praise set with everything in tune and crescendoing up, and we feel the music, we say, that was great praise. But what we're saying is really that was a great emotional experience. And what was designed where we confessionally together proclaim that God is in control, we forget about that. So on our drive home, when someone cuts us off, we forget that God is in control. We post something on social media and someone comments in a way that offends us. Or when our children act in a way that we don't like, we've forgotten everything that we've sung because what we did when we sang that song was just focus on the experience and not necessarily allow that to penetrate.